My name is Emily Carter. I just turned 32 and I work in medical billing in Naperville, Illinois. 6 months ago, my father Frank sold his rental property to save my husband's family from foreclosure. He signed loan papers in our kitchen, smiling as he handed over $58,000. Your dad's amazing, my husband Ethan said that night. Really came through for us. He loves family, I replied. He'd do anything to help. Yeah, family's everything, right? That's when Ethan picked up a pen and wrote out a promissory note. Just a formality, he said, laughing as he signed it. Do we really need this between family? 2 weeks later, I found a text on his phone. Jessica can't wait to see you tomorrow night. I confronted him in our living room. I had dashcam footage of him with another woman. Are you having an affair? I asked. Yes, he said simply. I am. What about us? Our marriage? Emily, I've gotten what I needed from this marriage. I'm done with you. My husband took my father's sacrifice and used it to fund his betrayal. He looked me in the eye and called our marriage a transaction. But what Ethan didn't know was that the promissory note he laughingly called, just a formality, would become the key evidence that destroyed him in divorce court. That piece of paper he said we didn't need between family? It would change his life forever. If you're hearing this story, tell me in the comments. Where in the world are you listening from? Before we begin today's story, please don't forget to subscribe and hit the like button. Now let's get started. The kitchen table in Naperville sat under morning light. Emily Carter spread bills across its wooden surface. Her coffee grew cold as she sorted Medicare statements from bank notices. A white envelope caught her attention. The return address showed a medical center downtown. She opened it carefully. The Medicare EOB inside wasn't hers. The patient name read, Frank Carter. Her father's name. Emily frowned. Dad never mentioned any medical visits. She set the paper aside and reached for her coffee mug. The ceramic felt warm against her palm. The front door creaked open. Frank's voice carried from the hallway. You home? Kitchen, Dad. Frank appeared in the doorway. His gray hair was combed neatly. He wore his blue flannel shirt and carried a small plastic pill organizer. The weekly compartments were labeled with careful handwriting. Morning, he said. He moved slowly toward the counter. That cabinet hinge still giving you trouble? Emily nodded toward the upper cabinet near the sink. The door hung slightly crooked. It's been loose for weeks. Frank set his pill organizer on the counter. He used it as a paperweight while examining the hinge. His hands shook slightly as he tested the screws. Emily noticed but didn't comment. Need a screwdriver, Frank said. Emily opened the utility drawer. She handed him a small Phillips head screwdriver. Their fingers touched briefly. His skin felt cool and thin. Frank worked quietly. The screwdriver made small clicking sounds against the metal hinge. He paused twice to steady his grip. Emily watched from the table. There, he said finally. The cabinet door closed properly. Should hold for a while. Thanks, Dad. Frank wiped his hands on a dish towel. He glanced at the papers spread across the table. Paying bills again? Always paying bills, Emily replied. Frank picked up his pill organizer. The plastic compartments rattled softly. Aging paperwork, he joked. Gets worse every year. Emily smiled but her eyes stayed on his hands. The tremor was slight but persistent. She filed the observation away without speaking. The kitchen door opened again. Ethan Miller entered, carrying his white chef jacket over his arm. His dark hair was disheveled. He moved with the tired urgency of someone running late. Sorry, he said. Lost track of time. Emily looked up from her papers. Everything okay at work? Ethan draped his jacket over a chair. The fabric still smelled of kitchen grease and herbs. Dad's business is just hitting a rough patch. Nothing serious. His voice sounded casual, but his eyes avoided Emily's as he spoke. She noticed the way his fingers drummed against the chair back. What kind of rough patch? Emily asked. Cash flow stuff. Restaurant business, you know? Ethan moved toward the coffee maker. It'll work out. Frank watched the exchange from the counter. He said nothing but his expression grew thoughtful. Ethan poured coffee into a travel mug. The liquid steamed in the morning air. I should get going. Staff meeting at 9. He kissed Emily's forehead quickly. His lips felt warm but distracted. Then he grabbed his jacket and headed for the door. See you tonight, Emily called. Sure thing. The door closed with a soft click. Emily stared at the empty doorway. Something felt incomplete in their conversation. The timing, the quick departure, the way he'd avoided her questions. Frank cleared his throat. Rough patch, huh? That's what he said. Frank nodded slowly. He picked up the Medicare EOB from Emily's pile of papers. This yours? Emily shook her head. It came with my mail. Must be a mistake. Frank studied the document. His face remained neutral, but Emily saw tension in his jaw. Medical center downtown, he murmured. Dad? Is everything okay? Just routine stuff. Frank folded the paper and tucked it into his shirt pocket. Nothing to worry about. Emily wanted to press further, but Frank was already moving toward the door. His walker sat in the hallway. She heard the soft scrape of metal legs against hardwood as he prepared to leave. That afternoon, Emily worked at her desk in the living room. Sunlight streamed through the windows. The house felt quiet and settled. She reviewed insurance claims for her job at the medical billing company. Numbers filled the computer screen. Deductibles, copays, out-of-pocket maximums, the same terminology that appeared on her family's bills. The irony wasn't lost on her. Her phone buzzed. A text from Ethan, working late tonight. Don't wait up. Emily frowned. 2 late nights this week already. She typed back, everything still okay? The response came quickly, fine. Just busy. Emily set the phone down. The house grew quieter around her. Outside, a neighbor's dog barked once and then stopped. The refrigerator hummed in the kitchen. She returned to her computer screen but found herself distracted. The Medicare EOB bothered her. Frank's trembling hands. Ethan's evasive answers. Small things that felt connected somehow. Evening came slowly. Emily prepared dinner for one. She made a simple salad and heated leftover soup. The kitchen felt larger without company. Around 9 o'clock, she heard voices outside. Ethan's voice, muffled but animated. Emily moved to the window and looked out. Ethan stood in the driveway, phone pressed to his ear. His free hand gestured as he spoke. Emily stepped closer to the window. She couldn't make out words, but Ethan's tone sounded urgent. Almost pleading. He paced back and forth beside his car. Emily's hand touched the window glass. The surface felt cool against her palm. She wanted to go outside and ask who he was talking to. Instead, she stepped back into the shadows. Ethan finished his call and came inside. He entered through the kitchen door, keys jingling in his hand. How was work? Emily asked from the living room. Long day. Ethan's voice carried from the kitchen. Really long. Emily heard the refrigerator door open and close. Water running in the sink. The familiar sounds of Ethan's evening routine. But tonight they felt distant. She remained in the living room, listening. Ethan moved upstairs without coming to say good night. His footsteps crossed the bedroom floor above her head. Emily thought we survived worse than this. The phrase came automatically. A mantra she'd developed during their early marriage when money was tight and arguments were frequent. They'd weathered those storms, built something stable together. But tonight, stability felt fragile. Emily turned off the living room lights and headed upstairs. The hallway was dark except for a thin line of light under the bedroom door. She paused outside, listening to Ethan moving around inside. She thought about Frank's trembling hands. The Medicare EOB that wasn't hers. Ethan's whispered phone calls. Small cracks in their ordinary life. Emily pushed the thoughts away. Tomorrow would bring clarity. Tonight she would choose trust over suspicion. Faith over fear. She opened the bedroom door quietly. Ethan lay on his side, facing away from her. His breathing was steady but not quite the rhythm of sleep. Emily changed into her pajamas in the dark. She slipped into bed carefully, trying not to disturb the mattress. The sheets felt cool against her skin. Outside, the neighborhood settled into evening quiet. A car passed on the street. A door closed somewhere nearby. The ordinary sounds of suburban life continuing. Emily stared at the ceiling. The house around them felt solid. Walls and roof and foundation. Something tangible to hold on to. Something that couldn't disappear without warning. She closed her eyes and let sleep come gradually. Tomorrow she would file the Medicare EOB properly. Ask Frank about his doctor visits. Talk to Ethan about his late nights. Tomorrow she would take control of the small things that bothered her. For now, she held on to the belief that stability was something you could grip if you tried hard enough. That homes and marriages and families were built to last. That morning would bring answers instead of more questions. The digital clock beside the bed showed 11:47. Emily's breathing slowed to match the quiet rhythm of the house around her. The diner on 5th Street smelled of bacon grease and coffee. Frank Carter slid into the vinyl booth across from David Miller, Ethan's father. The lunch rush had passed. Only a few customers remained scattered across the empty restaurant. David looked older than his 68 years. His gray suit hung loose on his frame. Dark circles shadowed his eyes. He stirred sugar into his coffee with mechanical precision. "Thanks for meeting me," David said. Frank nodded. Sounded important on the phone. The waitress approached with a coffee pot. She filled Frank's mug without asking. The steam rose between the two men like a barrier neither wanted to cross. David reached into his jacket pocket. He withdrew a folded envelope and placed it on the table. The paper was wrinkled from handling. Frank could see the letterhead through the thin material. "Bank notice," David said quietly. Frank didn't touch the envelope. "Bad news? Foreclosure proceedings." David's voice barely rose above a whisper. 60 days to respond." The words hung in the air. Frank felt something cold settle in his chest. He reached for his coffee but his hand trembled slightly. The mug rattled against the saucer. "How long have you known?" Frank asked. 2 months. Maybe 3. David unfolded the notice and spread it flat on the table. "I kept thinking something would turn around. A late payment from the catering company. Insurance settlement from the kitchen fire." Frank studied the document. Legal language filled the page. Amounts owed. Missed payments. Default procedures. The numbers were larger than he'd expected. "Restaurant business has been rough," David continued. "Supply costs up. Labor shortage. Competition from those chain places." Frank understood. He'd watched small businesses struggle in their neighborhood. Family shops closing after decades. Empty storefronts with "for lease" signs gathering dust. "What about Ethan?" Frank asked. "Does he know?" David shook his head. "I wanted to handle it myself. Keep the family out of it." Frank sipped his coffee. The liquid tasted bitter despite the cream. He thought about Emily and Ethan's marriage. The house they'd bought together. The stability they'd built. "If you lose the house," Frank said slowly, "where will you go?" David's shoulders sagged. "Don't know. Maybe rent somewhere smaller. Ethan's been talking about us moving in with them temporarily." Frank set down his coffee cup. The implication was clear. Emily and Ethan's house would become shelter for displaced family members. Their quiet suburban life would be disrupted. Their finances stretched thin. "Emily doesn't know any of this," Frank said. "No. And I'd like to keep it that way until we figure something out." Frank understood the request. But keeping secrets felt like planting bombs. Eventually, they exploded in the worst possible places. The television in the corner played local news. A segment about rising property taxes in Cook County. Frank watched the screen and thought about his own small rental property. The monthly income that supplemented his Social Security. The nest egg he'd planned to leave Emily someday. What if there was another option? Frank said. David looked up from the foreclosure notice. "What do you mean?" Frank didn't answer immediately. He was thinking about equity and mortgages and the difference between losing everything and losing something manageable. The math was complicated but not impossible. "Let me ask you something," Frank said. "How much would it take to stop this? To catch up the payments and keep the house?" David checked the notice. His finger traced down the column of numbers. 47,000, plus penalties and legal fees. Maybe 55 total. Frank nodded. The amount was significant but not insurmountable. He owned his rental property outright. The small duplex in Oak Park had been his safety net for retirement. But safety nets were meant to be used when families were falling. "I might be able to help," Frank said. David's expression shifted, hope mixed with embarrassment. "Frank, I couldn't ask you to." "You're not asking. I'm offering." Frank folded the foreclosure notice and handed it back. "Family takes care of family." David accepted the paper with shaking hands. It would be a loan. With interest. Full repayment terms. "We'll work out the details." Frank stood up from the booth. His joints protested the movement but he ignored the discomfort. "Give me a few days to talk to my lawyer." Frank drove home slowly. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across suburban streets. He passed the senior center where he volunteered on Thursdays. The building looked solid and permanent. A place where people gathered when their own homes became too large or too empty. At home, Frank sat at his kitchen table with a calculator and a stack of financial documents. Bank statements, property tax records, the deed to his rental property. Numbers that represented decades of careful saving and conservative investment. The duplex was worth approximately $120,000. No mortgage, no liens, clean title. He could borrow against it or sell it outright. Either option would generate enough cash to save David's house and preserve Emily's stability. Frank thought about Emily's marriage, the careful way she and Ethan had built their life together. The house in Naperville with its mortgage payments and property taxes. The routine of work and family and ordinary happiness. If David's house fell into foreclosure, those routines would crumble. Emily and Ethan would face the pressure of supporting displaced family members. Their finances would stretch beyond comfort. Their marriage would bear weight it wasn't designed to carry. Frank picked up his phone and dialed Emily's number. "Dad?" Emily's voice sounded surprised. "Is everything okay?" "Fine, sweetheart. Just wanted to check in." Frank kept his voice casual. "How's work treating you?" "Same as always. Insurance claims and paperwork." Emily paused. "Actually, I wanted to ask you about something. I got a Medicare statement in the mail with your name on it." Frank felt his chest tighten. The cardiologist appointment he'd hoped to keep private. Just routine stuff. Annual checkup. "You should have told me. I would have driven you. I'm not helpless yet." Frank tried to inject humor into his voice. "Still remember how to drive myself to the doctor." Emily laughed, but Frank could hear the concern underneath. "Next time, let me know. I worry about you doing everything alone." "I will." Frank meant it. But first, he had to handle this crisis with David. Keep Emily's world stable for a little while longer. "How's Ethan doing?" "Busy. Working late a lot. Says his dad's business is going through some challenges." Frank closed his eyes. Emily was already sensing the ripple effects. The stress was reaching their marriage even before the crisis became public. "Business challenges can be tough," Frank said carefully. "But they usually work themselves out." "I hope so." "Ethan seems worried, but he won't talk about details." Frank understood Ethan's silence. Men often tried to shoulder financial burdens alone. Pride and protectiveness made them believe they could fix everything without involving their wives. But silence created its own kind of damage. "Give him time," Frank advised. "Sometimes talking makes problems feel more real." After ending the call, Frank sat in his quiet kitchen. The house around him felt smaller than usual. 3 bedrooms and 2 bathrooms for one person. More space than he needed. More house than he could maintain much longer. The rental property made sense as a financial resource. But it also represented his independence. His ability to live comfortably without burdening Emily. His backup plan if health problems required expensive care. Frank opened his laptop and researched home equity loans. Interest rates. Repayment terms. The mathematics of turning property into cash. The process would take several weeks. David had 60 days to respond to the foreclosure notice. The timing was tight but manageable. That evening, Frank called his lawyer. Margaret Walsh had handled his estate planning for 15 years. She understood his priorities and his concerns about Emily's future security. "It's possible," Margaret said after Frank explained the situation. "But it's also risky. What if David's business doesn't recover? What if he can't repay the loan?" Frank had considered those possibilities. Business failures, extended unemployment, health crises that prevented David from working. All the ways good intentions could lead to financial disaster. "Emily's stability is worth the risk," Frank said. "And your own stability? Your retirement security?" Frank looked around his kitchen. The refrigerator covered with Emily's children's artwork from years past. The family photos on the counter. The evidence of a life built around caring for other people. "I've had my turn at security," Frank said. "Now it's her turn." Margaret agreed to prepare the paperwork. Home equity loan application. Promissory note. Legal documentation to protect everyone involved. The process would take time, but Frank felt relief at having a plan. Later that night, Frank sat on his back porch. The neighborhood was quiet except for the distant hum of air conditioners and the occasional car passing on the street. Summer insects buzzed in the darkness. He thought about Emily's voice on the phone. The way she'd laughed when he'd joked about driving himself to the doctor. She still saw him as capable and independent. Not as someone who might need care himself someday. Frank pulled out the Medicare statement Emily had mentioned. The one that had arrived at her house by mistake. The cardiologist's bill for his stress test and consultation. The follow-up appointment scheduled for next month. The results hadn't been alarming. Some irregularities, medication adjustments, lifestyle changes. Nothing immediately dangerous, but nothing to ignore either. The kind of health news that reminded a person that time was finite and decisions had consequences. Frank folded the statement and tucked it back into his wallet. Emily didn't need to worry about his health on top of everything else. One crisis at a time was enough for any family. Tomorrow he would begin the process of borrowing against his house, converting his security into Emily's stability. It felt like the right choice. The only choice that preserved what mattered most. The word, foreclosure, echoed in his mind. Such a sterile term for something that destroyed families. Frank had seen it happen to neighbors and friends over the years. Houses lost, lives disrupted, relationships strained beyond repair. Not Emily's life, not if Frank could prevent it. He stood up from his porch chair and went inside. The house felt warm and settled around him. 40 years of memories built into every room. But memories were portable. Security could be transferred. Love meant making sacrifices that protected the people who mattered most. Frank locked the door and turned off the lights. Upstairs, his bedroom felt larger than necessary. The king-sized bed he'd shared with Emily's mother until her death 10 years ago. Now it was just Frank and the empty space where partnership used to be. He lay down and stared at the ceiling. Tomorrow would bring phone calls and paperwork and the machinery of financial rescue. But tonight, Frank felt the calm that came from having a purpose larger than himself. Emily's marriage would survive this crisis. Her house would remain secure. Her world would stay stable while Frank quietly rearranged his own priorities around her needs. The word, foreclosure, would not touch his daughter's life. Frank closed his eyes and let sleep come slowly. Outside, the neighborhood continued its quiet rhythms. Ordinary life proceeding normally while crisis waited just beneath the surface. But morning would bring solutions instead of surrender. Hope instead of helplessness. The power to protect family when everything else felt uncertain. Frank's rental property sat on a quiet street in Oak Park. 2 small units side by side with separate entrances. The building was nothing spectacular. Vinyl siding and modest landscaping. But it had been Frank's security for 20 years. He unlocked the front door of his own house and went straight to his home office. The small room held a desk, filing cabinet, and decades of important papers. Frank opened the bottom drawer and removed a manila folder labeled, Oak Park Property. Inside was the deed, a simple document that represented his life's work beyond raising Emily. The duplex had been purchased with insurance money after Emily's mother died. An investment in the future. A way to ensure he would never be a financial burden on his daughter. Frank spread the deed on his desk. The legal description meant little to him. Lot numbers and survey coordinates. But the clear title meant everything. No mortgages, no liens. Property owned free and clear in a neighborhood that had maintained its value through decades of economic change. The phone rang. David Miller's voice sounded strained. Frank, I've been thinking about our conversation yesterday. I can't let you risk your property for our problems. Frank looked at the deed in front of him. It's not your decision to make, David. It's mine. Your daughter would never forgive me if something went wrong. Emily doesn't need to know the details. This stays between us until everything is settled. There was silence on the phone. Frank could hear David's television in the background. A cooking show or food commercial. The irony of restaurant sounds in a house facing foreclosure. How would this work? David asked finally. I'll get a home equity loan against my rental property. Enough to catch up your mortgage payments and cover the penalties. You'll sign a promissory note for the full amount plus reasonable interest. And if I can't pay it back? Frank had considered this possibility during sleepless hours the night before. Business recovery was never guaranteed. David was approaching 70. His energy and health might not sustain the effort required to rebuild. We'll cross that bridge when we come to it, Frank said. Right now, we focus on keeping your house. Frank called Margaret Walsh and scheduled an appointment for that afternoon. Then he drove to the bank where he'd held accounts for 30 years. The loan officer, a woman in her 40s, reviewed his financial documents with professional efficiency. The property appraisal will take a week, she explained. Based on comparable sales in Oak Park, you should qualify for up to 80% of market value. Probably around $90,000. More than enough to save David's house. Frank signed the initial paperwork and scheduled the property inspection. The process felt surreal, converting his security into someone else's rescue. But Emily's face kept appearing in his mind. The trust in her eyes when she talked about her marriage and her future. That evening, Emily stopped by Frank's house with dinner. Takeout from the Chinese restaurant they both enjoyed. She unpacked containers on his kitchen table while he watched from the doorway. You look tired, Dad. Just busy. Paperwork stuff. Emily arranged plates and chopsticks. Her movements were efficient but careful. The way she'd always approached tasks that mattered. Work paperwork or personal paperwork? Frank joined her at the table. The food smelled familiar and comforting. Thinking about making some changes to my investments. Nothing dramatic. Changes like what? Frank served himself fried rice and sweet and sour chicken. The ordinary ritual of sharing a meal with his daughter. Maybe liquidating the rental property. Simplifying my finances. Emily paused with her chopsticks halfway to her mouth. Dad, that's your retirement income. You can't just sell it. I'm 71 years old. How much retirement do I need? Don't talk like that. Emily's voice carried a sharp edge. You could live another 20 years. That income keeps you independent. Frank understood her concern. Children worried about their parents becoming financial burdens. The role reversal that came with aging. Emily wanted him to remain self-sufficient as long as possible. Sometimes independence means making choices that help other people, Frank said. Emily studied his face. This is about Ethan's family, isn't it? Their business problems. Frank kept his expression neutral. What makes you say that? Ethan's been strange lately. Working late. Taking mysterious phone calls. And now you're talking about liquidating assets. Emily set down her chopsticks. How bad is it, Dad? Frank weighed his options. Complete honesty would terrify Emily. But lying felt increasingly difficult. David's facing some challenges. Business has been rough. What kind of challenges? The kind that threaten everything he's built. Emily absorbed this information quietly. Frank watched her process the implications. Her house becoming temporary shelter for displaced family members. Her marriage bearing financial pressure it wasn't designed to handle. Her careful plans disrupted by forces beyond her control. How can we help? Emily asked finally. The question revealed Emily's character. Not whether to help, but how. Frank felt pride mixed with protective anxiety. His daughter's generous instincts would lead her to sacrifice too much if he wasn't careful. I'm working on some options, Frank said. Nothing definitive yet. Emily reached across the table and touched his hand. Her skin felt warm and young. Don't do anything drastic without talking to me first. Frank nodded but didn't promise. Some decisions were too heavy for adult children to carry. Some sacrifices needed to be made quietly by parents who understood the long view of family protection. 3 days later, Frank received approval for his home equity loan. $92,000 at a reasonable interest rate. Enough to save David's house with room for unexpected expenses. Frank signed the loan documents with steady hands. That evening, he met David at a small family restaurant near the senior center. David had chosen a corner booth away from other diners. The lighting was dim and the atmosphere felt conspiratorial. It's approved, Frank said. He slid a folder across the table. Loan papers and a cashier's check for $58,000. Enough to catch up your mortgage and cover all the penalties. David opened the folder with shaking hands. The check was made out to his mortgage company. The promissory note outlined repayment terms. $60,000 at 6% interest. Monthly payments of $800 for 10 years. Frank, I don't know what to say. Say you'll use this money to save your house and rebuild your business. David wiped his eyes with his napkin. Ethan doesn't know how close we came to losing everything. Good. Keep it that way as long as possible. They shook hands across the table. The gesture felt formal and binding. Frank had committed his financial security to David's recovery. The rental property that had been his safety net was now leveraged against a promise. The next morning, David deposited the check and called his mortgage company. The foreclosure proceedings stopped immediately. Late payments were caught up. Penalties were satisfied. The house that had been 60 days from auction was suddenly secure again. Frank received a call from David that afternoon. "It's done. The house is safe." Frank felt relief wash over him like warm water. Emily's world would remain stable. Her marriage wouldn't face the crushing pressure of supporting homeless family members. The crisis had been resolved quietly and efficiently. That evening, Ethan came home from work in a better mood than Frank had seen in weeks. Emily called to report the change. "He's like a different person," she said. Laughing at dinner. Talking about vacation plans. Whatever was bothering him seems to have resolved itself. Frank smiled as he listened to his daughter's voice. The joy and relief that came from not knowing how close her world had come to collapsing. Sometimes ignorance was a gift parents gave their children. "I'm glad he's feeling better," Frank said. His dad must have found a way to work through those business problems. Must have. Frank didn't mention his role in David's solution. Emily would learn about the loan eventually. When David was back on his feet and able to discuss the crisis from a position of strength rather than desperation. For now, the fiction that everything had worked out naturally was kinder than the truth. Frank spent the evening on his back porch, watching the neighborhood settle into night routines. Porch lights coming on, television screens glowing through windows. The comfortable rhythms of suburban life continuing without interruption. His rental property would generate enough income to cover the loan payments for several years. After that, the math became more complicated. Frank might need to sell the duplex entirely or find other sources of income. But those were problems for the future. Tonight, Emily was safe. Her marriage was stable. Her plans could continue without disruption. Frank had used his accumulated resources to purchase his daughter's security. It felt like the most important investment of his life. The deed to his rental property sat in his desk drawer, now encumbered by a $92,000 mortgage. The clear title was gone, but the purpose remained. Protecting family when everything else felt uncertain. Frank thought about Emily's mother and the conversations they'd had about their daughter's future. The promises they'd made to ensure Emily would have every opportunity to build a good life. This loan felt like fulfilling those promises in ways they'd never anticipated. Inside the house, Frank's pill organizer sat on the kitchen counter. 7 days of medication carefully sorted and labeled. High blood pressure medication, cholesterol management, baby aspirin for cardiovascular protection. The small daily reminders that his time for financial recovery was limited. But Emily had decades ahead of her. Years to build wealth and security with Ethan. Time to raise children and develop careers and create the stable life that Frank's generation had worked to make possible for their children. Frank locked his doors and turned off the lights. Upstairs, his bedroom felt peaceful and settled. The king-sized bed that had once held 2 people planning their daughter's future. Now it held one person who had acted to protect that future when it was threatened. Frank closed his eyes and let satisfaction replace anxiety. The crisis was over. Emily's world remained intact. Family had protected family in the way that mattered most. Tomorrow would bring new routines. Loan payments instead of rental income. Careful budgeting instead of comfortable surplus. But tonight, Frank slept with the knowledge that his sacrifice had preserved something precious. What felt like courage would be tested by time and circumstance. But for now, it felt like love in action. The decision that should have been impossible had become the choice that made everything else possible. Months passed like pages turning in a book nobody was reading carefully. The foreclosure crisis became a memory that David and Frank shared in silence. Emily's life continued its comfortable rhythms. Work, family dinners, weekend errands, the ordinary happiness that comes from believing your world is secure. But small changes crept into the edges of Emily's attention like shadows moving across familiar rooms. Ethan stayed late at work more frequently. Monday became Tuesday became Thursday without him arriving home before 8 o'clock. His explanations were reasonable. Catering events, staff training, inventory management, the kind of restaurant business that demanded irregular hours. Emily accepted these explanations because they fit the pattern of their marriage. Ethan worked hard. Emily managed the household. They built their life together through complementary efforts that rarely overlapped. But the phone calls bothered her. Ethan answered calls in the driveway now, standing beside his car with his back to the house. Emily could see him through the kitchen window, gesturing with his free hand while he spoke. When she asked about these conversations, his answers became vague. Supplier issues, he would say. Or, scheduling problems, or, insurance questions. Emily tried to ignore her growing curiosity. Marriages required trust. Partners deserved privacy. The alternative was surveillance and suspicion that poisoned relationships from the inside. One evening in late September, Emily prepared dinner while waiting for Ethan to come home. She'd made his favorite meal. Pot roast with vegetables, mashed potatoes, homemade rolls that filled the kitchen with warm, yeasty smells. 6 o'clock became 7 became 8. The food stayed warm in the oven but the timing was ruined. Emily ate alone at the kitchen table, listening to the house settle around her. Ethan arrived at 9:15. He entered through the kitchen door carrying his chef jacket over his arm. The fabric smelled different tonight. Not just kitchen grease and herbs. Something floral, perfume or scented soap that didn't belong in a commercial kitchen. "Sorry I'm late," Ethan said. He hung his jacket on the back of a chair. Catering ran long. Emily gestured toward the stove. "Dinner's in the oven." "Thanks, but I grabbed something at work." Ethan moved toward the stairs without kissing her hello. "Long day. Think I'll shower and turn in early." Emily watched him disappear upstairs. The kitchen felt larger in his absence. She cleaned the dishes slowly, listening to water running in the shower above her head. The pot roast would become leftovers that would sit in the refrigerator until she finally threw them away. Small disappointments accumulated like dust in corners nobody cleaned. Missed dinners, abbreviated conversations, evenings when Ethan fell asleep facing away from her in their bed. Emily told herself these changes were temporary. Restaurant work was demanding. Ethan's father's business had faced serious challenges. The stress would ease when everything stabilized. But October brought new concerns that Emily couldn't rationalize away. She was sorting laundry when she found the prescription receipt in Ethan's coat pocket. The pharmacy slip was folded twice and tucked deep into the inner pocket where he kept his wallet and keys. Emily unfolded the paper and read the medication name. Lorazepam, an anxiety medication she recognized from her work processing medical claims. The prescription was filled 2 weeks ago. A 30-day supply with 1 refill remaining. Ethan had never mentioned anxiety problems. Never complained of stress symptoms that required medication. Emily checked the prescribing doctor's name. A family practice physician she didn't recognize. Someone who wasn't their usual doctor. Emily refolded the receipt and put it back where she'd found it. But the discovery bothered her through the rest of the day. If Ethan was struggling with anxiety, why hadn't he told her? If the stress was severe enough to require medication, what else wasn't he sharing? That evening, Emily tried to create an opening for conversation. She prepared a simple dinner and set the table with candles. When Ethan came home, she asked about his day with more attention than usual. "How's work been lately? You seem tired." Ethan shrugged as he served himself salad. "Same as always. Busy. Is your dad's business doing better?" "Yeah, much better. Crisis averted." Emily studied his face as he spoke. Ethan looked tired but not anxious. His hands were steady as he cut his chicken. No visible signs of the stress that apparently required prescription medication. "That's good news about your dad." "Yeah." Ethan reached for the salt. "He found some investors or something. Worked everything out." Emily wondered if Frank had played a role in David's recovery. Her father had been vague about his investment changes, but the timing seemed connected. She made a mental note to ask Frank about it when they next spoke. The conversation drifted to other topics. Work schedules, weekend plans, the ordinary negotiations of married life. But Emily sensed distance in Ethan's responses, as if he was participating in their marriage from somewhere far away. After dinner, Ethan retreated to the living room with his laptop. Emily cleaned the kitchen and tried to ignore the feeling that their evening had been performed rather than shared. Around 10 o'clock, Ethan's phone rang. He answered quickly and stepped outside. Emily watched from the kitchen window as he paced the driveway during the call. His body language seemed animated, more engaged than he'd been during dinner. When Ethan came back inside, Emily was wiping counters that were already clean. "Everything okay?" she asked. "Work stuff. Dave needs me to come in early tomorrow to prep for a weekend event." The explanation was reasonable, but Emily noticed that Ethan's phone showed a recently deleted call log. As if he'd erased the evidence of the conversation immediately after ending it. Emily said goodnight and went upstairs. Ethan remained in the living room with his laptop. She fell asleep to the sound of quiet typing from the room below. The next morning, Emily woke alone. Ethan's side of the bed was cold and empty. A note on the kitchen counter explained that he'd left early for the catering prep. Emily drank her coffee in silence and tried to remember when their mornings had stopped including goodbye kisses. Throughout November, the pattern continued. Late nights at work, mysterious phone calls, a growing emotional distance that Emily felt but couldn't name directly. Ethan was physically present but emotionally absent, going through the motions of their marriage without investing in its substance. Emily found herself paying attention to details she'd previously ignored. The mileage on Ethan's car seemed high for someone who worked close to home. His laundry smelled of unfamiliar fabric softener. He'd started locking his phone with a passcode she didn't know. None of these observations proved anything definitive, but together they created a picture that made Emily's stomach tighten with unnamed anxiety. One evening in late November, Emily called Frank just to hear a familiar voice. "How are things with you and Ethan?" Frank asked. The question caught Emily off guard. "Fine. Why do you ask? You sound tired." Emily curled up on the couch with her phone. Outside, November rain tapped against the windows. "Work's been busy. Ethan's been busy. We're both just tired." Tired is normal. Distant is concerning. Frank's observation was too accurate to dismiss. Emily felt tears prick at her eyes. "I think something's wrong, Dad. But I don't know what." "Wrong how?" "He's different. Secretive. Like he's somewhere else even when he's sitting right next to me." Frank was quiet for a moment. Emily could hear him breathing across the phone line. "Have you talked to him about it? How do you ask someone why they seem unhappy without sounding paranoid?" Frank understood the dilemma. Marriages walked a narrow line between healthy concern and destructive suspicion. Emily was trying to honor that boundary while protecting herself from whatever truth might be hiding beneath Ethan's changed behavior. "Trust your instincts," Frank said finally. "They're usually right about the people we love." After hanging up, Emily sat in the darkened living room and listened to the rain. Her instincts were screaming warnings she didn't want to hear, but acknowledgement felt like crossing a line from which there might be no return. Emily went to bed alone again that night. Ethan came home after midnight, moving carefully through the dark house. She pretended to be asleep as he undressed and slipped into bed beside her. In the morning, she would continue the routine of their marriage. Making coffee, checking schedules, pretending that everything was fine because pretending felt safer than knowing. But the unease had taken root now. It grew in the spaces between Ethan's words, in the silence that stretched too long after simple questions, in the feeling that she was living with someone who had become a stranger wearing her husband's face. Emily's world was shifting beneath her feet in ways she couldn't yet name or measure. The security she'd taken for granted was becoming an illusion maintained by willful blindness and desperate hope. The danger wasn't loud or dramatic. It was quiet and persistent, like water seeping through foundations until the damage became impossible to ignore. Emily closed her eyes and let exhaustion carry her toward sleep. Tomorrow would bring another day of careful observation and cautious questions. Another day of hoping her fears were unfounded while preparing herself for the possibility that they weren't. Her marriage was changing around her like seasons changing, gradually and then suddenly, with consequences she couldn't yet imagine but somehow knew would reshape everything she'd believed about her life with Ethan. The quiet shift was accelerating toward a reckoning that would demand choices Emily wasn't ready to make. Emily's mind drifted back to better times while she folded laundry on a quiet Thursday afternoon. The basket of clean clothes sat on the bed she'd shared with Ethan for 6 years. Shirts and jeans that still smelled of familiar detergent and fabric softener. She remembered their first apartment after the wedding. A cramped 2-bedroom place with thin walls and a leaky faucet. They'd been poor but happy, sharing leftovers for dinner and dreaming about the house they would buy someday. Ethan used to leave little notes in her lunch bag. Silly jokes and words of encouragement that made her smile during difficult workdays. He'd called her from the restaurant kitchen just to say he missed her. Their lives had been intertwined in ways that felt permanent and unbreakable. Emily picked up one of Ethan's work shirts. The white cotton was soft from repeated washing. She noticed a small tear near the collar that needed mending. These were the details that kept marriages functioning. The small repairs and daily maintenance that accumulated into years of shared life. But as she folded the shirt, Emily's fingers found something in the pocket. A small piece of paper folded twice and tucked deep into the fabric. She almost ignored it, probably a receipt or reminder note. But curiosity made her unfold the paper and read what was written there. It was a phone number, written in handwriting that wasn't Ethan's. A woman's handwriting with careful loops and flourishes. Below the number were 2 words, "Call me." Emily stared at the paper until the numbers blurred. Her hands began to shake. The laundry basket seemed to grow heavier on the bed beside her. A phone number meant nothing definitive. Could be a customer, a vendor, a colleague from the catering business. Restaurants were social places where people exchanged contact information for professional reasons. But the handwriting was too careful, too personal, and the words, "Call me," carried an intimacy that business contacts didn't require. Emily set the paper on the dresser and continued folding laundry. Her movements became automatic while her mind raced through possibilities she didn't want to consider. Ethan's late nights, his secretive phone calls, the prescription anxiety medication, the emotional distance that had grown between them like a wall built one brick at a time. That evening, Ethan came home carrying his phone in his hand. He'd been texting in the driveway before coming inside. Emily watched him through the kitchen window as he finished typing and slipped the phone into his pocket. "Good day?" Emily asked as Ethan entered the kitchen. "Busy, always busy." Ethan kissed her cheek quickly. His lips felt warm but distracted. "What's for dinner?" Emily gestured toward the stove. "Spaghetti and meatballs. Your favorite." They ate together at the kitchen table. Emily tried to make conversation, but Ethan's responses were brief and distant. His attention seemed divided between the meal and something else he couldn't discuss. "Ethan," Emily said carefully, "is everything okay with us?" Ethan looked up from his pasta. "What do you mean? You seem distant lately, like something's bothering you." "Work stress. Dad's business situation. Nothing that affects us." Emily wanted to mention the phone number. To ask directly about the woman who'd written, "Call me," in careful handwriting. But accusation would create a crisis that couldn't be undone. Either Ethan would deny everything and become more secretive, or he would admit something that would destroy their marriage. "I'm here if you want to talk," Emily said instead. Ethan nodded, but his expression didn't change. "Thanks, but everything's fine." After dinner, Ethan retreated to the living room with his laptop. Emily cleaned the kitchen and tried to ignore the sound of quiet typing from the next room. When she joined him on the couch an hour later, Ethan quickly closed the computer. "What were you working on?" Emily asked. "Just checking the restaurant's social media. Making sure the reviews are okay." Emily curled up beside him and reached for the television remote. They watched a cooking show in silence while Emily's mind raced with questions she couldn't ask directly. Around 10 o'clock, Ethan's phone buzzed with a text message. He read it quickly and stood up from the couch. "I need to step outside and make a call. Work emergency." Emily nodded, but her stomach tightened. Emergency calls at 10 o'clock on a Thursday night seemed unlikely for a restaurant that closed at 9. Through the window, she watched Ethan pace the driveway while he talked. His body language seemed relaxed and animated, not the stiff posture of someone handling a business crisis. When Ethan returned, Emily pretended to be absorbed in the television show. "Everything okay?" she asked without looking at him. "Yeah, just a scheduling issue for tomorrow. Nothing major." They went to bed together, but Emily lay awake listening to Ethan's breathing. He fell asleep quickly while Emily's mind churned with suspicion and dread. The next morning, Emily waited until Ethan left for work before searching his home office. She felt guilty about violating his privacy, but the phone number had awakened fears that demanded investigation. Ethan's desk held the usual collection of restaurant paperwork and household bills. Emily looked through everything carefully but found nothing suspicious. No love letters or photographs. No evidence of the relationship she was beginning to suspect. Emily turned on Ethan's desktop computer. He'd never hidden his password from her. She opened his email and scrolled through recent messages. Work communications. Spam. Nothing personal or revealing. But in the deleted items folder, Emily found something that made her breath catch. An email from 2 weeks ago with the subject line, "Tonight was perfect." The sender was someone named Jessica with an email address that meant nothing to Emily. The message itself had been deleted, but the subject line remained as evidence. Emily stared at the screen until her eyes burned. Tonight was perfect wasn't business correspondence. It was the language of romance, of intimacy, of secrets that destroyed marriages. Emily closed the email and turned off the computer. She sat in Ethan's chair and tried to process what she'd discovered. A phone number. A mysterious woman named Jessica. Email messages that suggested meetings Emily knew nothing about. The evidence was circumstantial but compelling. Ethan was having an affair. Emily felt something break inside her chest. Not her heart exactly, more like the foundation of everything she'd believed about her marriage. The trust that had held their relationship together was crumbling under the weight of deception. She thought about confronting Ethan immediately, demanding explanations and proof and promises that things would change. But confrontation would only drive the affair deeper underground. Ethan would become more careful about hiding evidence. The truth would become harder to uncover. Emily decided to wait, to watch, to gather more proof before forcing the crisis that would reshape their lives forever. That afternoon, Emily's 7-year-old nephew Danny visited while his mother ran errands. Danny was fascinated by technology and often played games on Ethan's phone when they babysat him. "Where's Uncle Ethan?" Danny asked as Emily prepared him a snack. "At work. But you can play on his tablet if you want." Danny shook his head. "I like his phone better. It has better games." Emily felt an idea forming. "His phone is upstairs charging. But maybe I can show you something fun on the computer instead." They spent an hour playing simple online games while Emily's mind worked on a different problem. If Danny could access Ethan's phone casually during family visits, other information might be accessible too. That evening, Ethan came home in a good mood. He kissed Emily hello with more warmth than usual and helped prepare dinner without being asked. His behavior felt like overcompensation. Guilty generosity that tried to balance secret betrayals. "You seem happy tonight," Emily observed. "Good day at work." Everything went smoothly for once. Emily wondered what had really made Ethan happy. Time spent with Jessica perhaps. Messages exchanged. Plans made for future meetings. After dinner, Danny called to thank them for the afternoon visit. Ethan answered the phone and chatted with his nephew while Emily listened from the kitchen. "Next time you visit, I'll show you a new game I downloaded," Ethan promised. When Danny asked to play games on Ethan's phone, Ethan laughed and agreed. "Sure thing, buddy. You know where I keep it." After hanging up, Ethan went upstairs to shower. Emily heard water running and saw her opportunity. Ethan's phone lay on his dresser where he always placed it when changing clothes. Emily picked it up and tried to unlock the screen. The passcode she'd seen him enter before no longer worked. He'd changed it recently. Emily tried different number combinations. Their anniversary, Ethan's birthday, her birthday. Nothing worked. The phone remained locked with its secrets hidden behind digital barriers. But as Emily held the device, it buzzed with an incoming text message. The notification appeared on the locked screen for just a few seconds before disappearing. Long enough for Emily to read the sender's name and part of the message. "Jessica can't wait to see you, Tom." The message was cut off, but Emily had seen enough. Jessica was real. She was making plans with Ethan. The affair wasn't Emily's imagination or paranoid suspicion. It was happening in real time while Emily pretended everything was normal. Emily quickly replaced the phone on the dresser and returned downstairs. Her hands shook as she loaded the dishwasher and tried to appear normal. When Ethan came downstairs in fresh clothes, Emily was sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of tea. Her face felt composed, but her heart raced with the knowledge that everything had changed. "I think I'll turn in early," Emily said. "Long day tomorrow. I'll be up soon. Just want to check a few things on my laptop." Emily nodded and headed upstairs. But instead of going to bed, she stood in the dark hallway and listened to Ethan moving around below. The familiar sounds of her husband ending his day while planning betrayals she was just beginning to understand. Emily thought about the woman named Jessica. She tried to imagine what Jessica looked like, where she and Ethan met. how long the affair had been happening, whether Emily was the last person to know about the destruction of her marriage. Tomorrow she would need to make decisions about what to do with her knowledge. Confrontation, investigation, divorce lawyers, the machinery of marital dissolution that transformed love into legal procedures. But tonight, Emily simply stood in the darkness and mourned the end of her innocence. The death of trust. The realization that the man sleeping beside her had become a stranger who shared her bed while sharing his secrets with someone else. The truth moved even when she stood still. Emily's marriage was ending whether she acknowledged it or not. Jessica's text message had simply provided proof of something that was already in motion. Emily's life was about to change in ways she couldn't control or prevent. The only choice left was how to navigate the crisis that was coming, whether she was ready or not. Emily spent 3 days planning the confrontation. She rehearsed different approaches while driving to work. Calm and rational questioning, emotional demands for truth, direct presentation of evidence. Each scenario felt inadequate for the magnitude of betrayal she was facing. On Monday evening, Emily prepared Ethan's favorite dinner. Grilled salmon with asparagus, the meal that marked special occasions and important conversations. If their marriage was ending, it should end with honesty rather than continued deception. Ethan arrived home at his usual time. He seemed relaxed and unsuspecting as he kissed Emily hello and commented on the delicious smells from the kitchen. "What's the occasion?" he asked, noticing the formal table setting and wine glasses. "I thought we should talk," Emily said. Her voice sounded steadier than she felt. They ate in relative silence. Emily struggled to swallow food that tasted like cardboard. Ethan seemed to enjoy his meal while making casual conversation about work and weather. The normalcy felt surreal given what Emily was about to reveal. After dinner, Emily suggested they move to the living room. She'd chosen the space carefully. Neutral territory with comfortable seating and no easy escape routes. "Ethan," Emily began, "I need to ask you something important." Ethan settled into his favorite chair with a glass of wine. "Sounds serious." Emily took a deep breath. "Are you having an affair?" The question hung in the air between them. Emily watched Ethan's face for signs of guilt or surprise. Instead, his expression remained calm and slightly amused. "That's a hell of a thing to ask," Ethan said. "It's a simple question that deserves a simple answer." Ethan sipped his wine thoughtfully. "What makes you think I'm having an affair?" Emily had prepared for this deflection. "Phone numbers in your pocket. Late nights at work. Deleted emails from someone named Jessica. Text messages I'm not supposed to see." Ethan set down his wine glass. His calm expression didn't change. "You've been going through my things. I found evidence by accident. Then I looked for more when you wouldn't explain what was happening. So you violated my privacy because you don't trust me." Emily felt anger rising in her chest. "I don't trust you because you're lying to me." Ethan stood up and walked to the window. He looked out at the street as if considering his options. When he turned back to face Emily, his expression had hardened. "Yes," he said simply. "I'm having an affair." The admission hit Emily like cold water. She'd expected denials and arguments. Not this casual confirmation of her worst fears. "How long?" Emily asked. 6 months. Maybe 7. "Who is she?" "Someone I met through work. A vendor for the restaurant." Emily absorbed this information slowly. Half a year of deception. Half a year of sharing her bed with someone who was sharing himself with another woman. "Do you love her?" Emily asked. Ethan returned to his chair. He looked at Emily with something approaching pity. "Yes, I do." Emily felt something break inside her chest. The last hope that this could be repaired. That their marriage could survive infidelity if it was meaningless physical betrayal rather than emotional replacement. "What about us?" Emily asked. "What about our marriage?" Ethan leaned forward in his chair. "Emily, I should have been honest sooner. This marriage hasn't been working for either of us. It's been working fine for me." "Has it? Really?" Ethan's voice carried a patronizing tone that made Emily's skin crawl. "When's the last time we had a real conversation? When's the last time you surprised me with anything? When's the last time you made me feel alive?" Emily stared at her husband. The man she'd married was transforming into a stranger who blamed her for his choices. "I made you feel alive by working and paying bills and taking care of our home while you played around with another woman?" Ethan shook his head. "You made me feel trapped. Controlled. Like every day was the same predictable routine. That's called marriage, Ethan. Building a life together. Creating stability. That's called existing, not living. Ethan finished his wine and set the glass down with finality. Jessica makes me feel alive again. She's spontaneous, fun, everything this relationship isn't. Emily stood up from the couch. Her legs felt unsteady, but her mind was crystallizing around one central truth. The man sitting across from her was not the person she'd married. He was someone who had used their marriage as a launching pad for selfishness and betrayal. So what happens now? Emily asked. I want a divorce. The words were spoken without emotion or regret, as if Ethan was ordering dinner or commenting on the weather. Emily realized that he'd been planning this conversation for months, waiting for the right moment to discard their marriage and move on to his new life. Just like that? 6 years of marriage and you walk away for someone you've known 6 months? Ethan stood up and moved toward the stairs. I've gotten what I needed from this marriage, Emily. Now I want something different. Emily watched him climb the stairs to pack his belongings. The casual cruelty of his words echoed in her mind. I've gotten what I needed from this marriage. As if Emily had been a stepping stone rather than a partner. A resource to be used and discarded when something better became available. Emily sat alone in the living room and tried to process the speed of their marriage's dissolution. One conversation had transformed her from wife to abandoned woman. From partner to obstacle. From person with a future to person planning survival. But underneath the shock and pain, Emily felt something else growing. Anger. Clean and sharp and clarifying. Ethan had not just betrayed their marriage. He had insulted her intelligence by blaming her for his choices. Had treated her like an inconvenience rather than a human being deserving of basic respect. Emily thought about Frank's home equity loan. The money he'd borrowed against his retirement to save David's house. The sacrifice her father had made to preserve Emily's stability. Ethan had been willing to accept that financial help while planning his exit strategy. He had used her family's generosity to buy time for his affair. Emily pulled out her phone and opened the voice recorder app. If Ethan wanted to destroy their marriage, he would do it with honesty rather than fiction. She would document his admissions for the divorce proceedings that were apparently inevitable. 20 minutes later, Ethan came downstairs carrying a suitcase and garment bag. He'd packed efficiently as if he'd been planning this departure for weeks. Where will you stay? Emily asked. Jessica has a place. Of course she did. Emily wondered how long Ethan had been essentially living a double life. How many nights he'd claimed to work late while actually staying with his lover. How many lies he'd told to maintain the fiction of their marriage while planning its destruction. What about your father's house? The financial help my family provided? Ethan paused at the front door. That was between your dad and my dad. Nothing to do with us. Everything to do with us. My father risked his retirement savings to help your family. While you were planning to abandon our marriage. Ethan shifted his bags to his other hand. Frank made his choice. I'm making mine. Emily stood up from the couch. You're making your choice with my family's money supporting you. Life is complicated, Emily. People change. Situations change. People change. But decent people don't use other people's sacrifices to enable their betrayals. Ethan opened the front door. Cool night air entered the house along with the sound of traffic and distant music. The ordinary sounds of neighborhood life continuing while Emily's world collapsed. I'll be back for the rest of my things this weekend, Ethan said. Take everything tonight. I don't want you in this house again. Ethan hesitated in the doorway. For a moment, Emily thought she saw regret or uncertainty in his expression. But the moment passed quickly. I'm sorry it ended this way, he said. No, you're not. You're sorry you got caught. Ethan left without responding. Emily watched from the window as he loaded his bags into his car and drove away. The taillights disappeared around the corner, taking with them 6 years of marriage and all the plans they'd made together. Emily locked the front door and turned off the porch light. The house felt different now. Larger and quieter. Not the home they'd shared but the space where Emily would rebuild whatever came next. She thought about calling Frank but decided against it. Her father had already sacrificed enough for this family crisis. Emily would handle the aftermath of her marriage alone until she understood what she was dealing with. Emily poured herself a glass of wine and sat at the kitchen table where they'd eaten their last dinner together. The dishes were still in the sink. Evidence of the meal that had preceded the end of everything familiar. But alongside the grief and shock, Emily felt something unexpected. Relief. The months of suspicion and anxiety were over. The truth had been revealed. The pretending was finished. Emily was alone, but she was no longer living a lie. Ethan's casual cruelty had freed her from any obligation to preserve what he had already destroyed. Tomorrow she would begin the process of entangling their shared life and building something new from what remained. Tonight, she would simply sit in her kitchen and acknowledge that sometimes the end of one thing was the beginning of something better. Even when the beginning felt like falling into darkness. Emily's marriage was over, but Emily herself was just getting started. Emily hired a divorce lawyer 3 days after Ethan moved out. Margaret Walsh, the same attorney who had handled Frank's estate planning and home equity loan, agreed to represent Emily in the dissolution of her marriage. Margaret's office was located in a professional building downtown. The waiting room smelled of leather and coffee. Legal books lined the walls along with framed diplomas and certificates that projected competence and success. "Tell me what happened," Margaret said after Emily settled into the chair across from her desk. Emily recounted the discovery of the affair, the confrontation, Ethan's casual admission and immediate departure. Margaret took notes on a yellow legal pad while Emily spoke. 6-year marriage, no children, joint ownership of the house, shared bank accounts. Margaret reviewed her notes. This should be relatively straightforward unless there are complicating factors. Emily thought about Frank's loan to David, the home equity money that had prevented foreclosure. There might be some complications related to family financial arrangements. Margaret looked up from her notepad. What kind of arrangements? Emily explained Frank's sacrifice, the rental property leveraged to save David's house, the timing of the loan coinciding with Ethan's affair, the possibility that Ethan had accepted her family's help while planning his exit from the marriage. "That's interesting," Margaret said. "Do you have documentation of this loan?" "My father might. He's careful about paperwork." Margaret made additional notes. "If your father provided financial assistance to Ethan's family during the marriage, that could be considered a marital asset or debt depending on the circumstances." Emily felt a spark of hope. Meaning what exactly? Meaning Ethan might have obligations related to that assistance, especially if he benefited from it while concealing his affair. Margaret outlined the divorce process. Asset division, debt allocation, spousal support considerations, the legal machinery that transformed love into accounting and shared dreams into property disputes. Illinois is a no-fault divorce state, Margaret explained. Adultery doesn't automatically affect property division, but it can influence spousal support calculations and asset distribution if financial misconduct is involved. Emily left the meeting with homework. Gather financial documents, list assets and debts, provide evidence of Ethan's affair and its timeline, transform her marriage into spreadsheets and sworn affidavits. That evening, Emily called Frank to explain what was happening. She'd avoided the conversation for 3 days but couldn't proceed without involving him in the legal complexities. "I'm sorry, sweetheart," Frank said after Emily finished explaining. "I know this is devastating. I keep thinking about your loan to David. About the timing. Ethan was planning this betrayal while accepting help from our family." Frank was quiet for a moment. "The loan was between David and me. Don't let it complicate your divorce. But it might help, Dad. Margaret thinks Ethan could have legal obligations related to financial benefits he received during the marriage. I don't want you using my loan as a weapon." Emily understood Frank's reluctance. He'd made the loan to preserve family harmony, not to create legal leverage in a divorce war. But Ethan's betrayal had changed the moral calculus. "He used our family, Dad. He accepted your sacrifice while planning to abandon our marriage. That's not just adultery. It's fraud." Frank agreed to provide documentation if Margaret needed it. Emily thanked him and promised to keep him informed about the legal proceedings. The next morning, Emily began the process of financial archaeology. She gathered bank statements, tax returns, credit card bills, and investment accounts. 6 years of shared finances spread across the kitchen table like evidence in a criminal investigation. Emily discovered things she'd overlooked during the marriage. Credit card charges at restaurants she'd never heard of. Hotel bills for business trips that Ethan had claimed were local catering events. cash advances that didn't correspond to any expenses she could identify. The financial deception ran deeper than the emotional betrayal. Ethan had been funding his double life with marital assets while claiming business expenses. Emily felt anger crystallize into determination. She would document every suspicious transaction for Margaret's review. 2 weeks later, Emily received papers from Ethan's lawyer. A divorce petition that proposed dividing assets equally and disclaiming any spousal support obligations. The document portrayed their marriage as a brief partnership between equals who had simply grown apart. Emily showed the papers to Margaret during their next meeting. Standard opening position, Margaret said after reviewing the petition. He's hoping for a quick settlement that minimizes his financial exposure. What about the loan my father made to his family? Margaret consulted the notes from their previous meeting. I've been researching that. If Ethan benefited from your father's loan while concealing his affair, we might argue that constitutes marital misconduct affecting asset division. How does that work? Your father's loan prevented a foreclosure that would have forced Ethan's family to seek financial support from your marriage. By accepting that benefit while planning his exit, Ethan essentially used your family's generosity to subsidize his affair. Emily felt satisfaction at the legal logic. Ethan's betrayal had consequences beyond emotional damage. His choices had created financial obligations that divorce couldn't automatically erase. Margaret filed Emily's response to the divorce petition. A counter-proposal that demanded documentation of all marital spending, disclosure of financial benefits received from Emily's family, and equitable division of assets based on actual contributions rather than legal presumptions. This will get Ethan's attention, Margaret said. Most people expect divorce negotiations to focus on dividing what exists. We're questioning how assets were used during the marriage. The legal process moved slowly. Document requests, depositions, financial discovery that required both parties to provide detailed accounting of their spending and assets. Emily found the process exhausting but strangely satisfying. Finally, someone was demanding honesty from Ethan. 3 months after filing for divorce, Emily and Margaret met with Ethan and his lawyer in a conference room downtown. Ethan looked different, thinner, more tired. The easy confidence he'd displayed during their confrontation had been replaced by defensive anxiety. My client is prepared to offer a revised settlement, Ethan's lawyer announced. 60-40 division of marital assets in Ms. Carter's favor plus assumption of responsibility for the loan to his family. Emily looked at Margaret with surprise. He's willing to repay my father's loan? Apparently so. Emily studied Ethan's face across the conference table. He avoided eye contact while his lawyer outlined the new proposal. The financial pressure of divorce proceedings had apparently clarified his obligations. Why the change? Emily asked directly. Ethan's lawyer answered for him. My client recognizes the unique circumstances of your father's financial assistance and wants to resolve this matter equitably. Emily understood the subtext. Ethan's affair and financial misconduct had created legal vulnerabilities he couldn't afford to litigate. Settlement was cheaper than fighting accusations of marital fraud. We need time to review this offer, Margaret said. Outside the conference room, Emily felt cautious optimism. He's scared, isn't he? Terrified, Margaret confirmed. Adultery combined with financial misconduct creates significant legal exposure. He could face much worse consequences if we take this to trial. Emily thought about Frank's sacrifice. The rental property leveraged to save David's house while Ethan planned his betrayal. Justice felt closer than she'd expected. What do you recommend? Accept the settlement. 60% of marital assets plus loan repayment gives you more than fair compensation. Fighting for more might cost you time and money without guaranteeing better results. Emily agreed to the settlement terms. 2 weeks later, both parties signed final divorce papers in Margaret's office. Ethan looked relieved when the documents were completed. Emily felt something closer to closure than satisfaction. The divorce was finalized on a Thursday morning in early May. Emily walked out of the courthouse carrying papers that officially ended her marriage and restored her maiden name. The process had taken 8 months from confrontation to completion. Emily drove straight to Frank's house to deliver news of the settlement. Her father was working in his garden when she arrived, pulling weeds from around the tomato plants he grew every summer. It's over, Emily announced. The divorce is final. Frank straightened up from his gardening and wiped his hands on a dish towel. How do you feel? Free, angry, relieved, all at the same time. Emily showed Frank the settlement documents. Ethan's agreement to repay the loan plus interest. Emily's share of their joint assets. The financial security that would allow her to rebuild her life without immediate economic pressure. He'll actually pay back the loan? Frank asked. According to this, monthly payments start next month. Margaret says the court will enforce it if he tries to default. Frank read the documents carefully. This is more than I expected. It's what he owed you, plus what he owed me for 6 years of lies. Frank handed the papers back to Emily. I'm proud of you for fighting back. I learned from the best. They sat on Frank's back porch while Emily described the legal process. The discovery of financial deceptions. The pressure that forced Ethan's lawyer to recommend settlement. The satisfaction of watching someone face consequences for their choices. What's next for you? Frank asked. Emily had been thinking about that question for months. New apartment, new routines, maybe a new job, everything that got buried under 6 years of marriage. Sounds like a good plan. Emily felt optimistic for the first time in months. The divorce was behind her. The financial settlement provided breathing room for transition. Ethan's betrayal had ended their marriage but hadn't destroyed Emily's ability to build something better. That evening, Emily packed the last boxes in the house she'd shared with Ethan. The mortgage would be sold as part of the settlement. Emily would rent an apartment closer to Frank until she decided where to build her new life. As she folded clothes and wrapped dishes in newspaper, Emily thought about justice and consequences. Ethan had expected to abandon their marriage without financial penalty. Instead, his affair had cost him more than an honest divorce would have required. The paperwork that documented their marriage also documented its destruction. But the same legal system that recorded Ethan's betrayals also enforced his obligations. Justice moved slowly, but it moved completely when properly motivated. Emily taped the final box and labeled it with her new address. Tomorrow she would start rebuilding her life with resources Ethan had been forced to provide. The irony felt appropriate. Sometimes the paperwork protected victims instead of enabling predators. Sometimes the system worked for people who knew how to make it work. Emily's marriage was over, but her recovery had already begun. 6 months after the divorce was finalized, Emily moved into a 2-bedroom apartment 3 blocks from Frank's house. The space was smaller than the home she'd shared with Ethan, but it felt larger in ways that mattered. Every room belonged entirely to her. Every decision was made without negotiation or compromise. Emily chose paint colors that made her happy. Soft blue for the living room. Warm yellow for the kitchen. Colors that Ethan would have called impractical but that brought Emily peace when she returned home from work. The apartment came with a small balcony overlooking a neighborhood park. Emily bought plants for the outdoor space. Herbs for cooking. Flowers for beauty. The simple pleasure of nurturing something that belonged only to her felt revolutionary after years of shared responsibility. Frank helped Emily move furniture and hang pictures. His health seemed better since the stress of the loan crisis had resolved. The monthly payments from Ethan were arriving on schedule. Frank's rental property was generating income again. The financial pressure that had threatened his retirement had eased considerably. "This place suits you," Frank said as they finished arranging Emily's living room furniture. Emily looked around the space she'd created. Simple furniture arranged for comfort rather than impression. Books displayed openly instead of hidden in spare bedrooms. Her own taste expressed without apology or explanation. "It feels like home already," Emily said. Frank sat in Emily's new armchair and accepted a cup of coffee. "How's work been treating you?" Emily had received a promotion at the medical billing company. More responsibility and better pay. The recognition of skills that had been developed during her marriage but overshadowed by domestic obligations. "Busy but good. I'm managing a team now. Actually using my brain for something besides meal planning and household maintenance." Frank smiled at the pride in Emily's voice. "Your mother always said you were capable of more than you realized." Emily thought about her mother often these days. The woman who had died when Emily was 25. Before marriage and mortgage payments had defined Emily's identity. Her mother had been independent and confident. Qualities that Emily was rediscovering in herself. "I've been thinking about going back to school," Emily said. "Maybe getting an MBA. The company offers tuition assistance for management track employees. Frank nodded approvingly. Sounds like a good investment in your future. Emily's future felt expansive now, open to possibilities that hadn't existed during her marriage. Career advancement, educational opportunities, travel and adventures that didn't require spousal agreement or compromise. What about dating? Frank asked carefully. Meeting anyone interesting? Emily laughed. Dad, I'm 32 years old and just got out of a marriage that ended with infidelity and divorce. Dating is not exactly my priority right now. I understand. Just want to make sure you're not closing yourself off to new relationships. Emily appreciated Frank's concern but felt no urgency about romance. The divorce had taught her the difference between being alone and being lonely. She was alone by choice now, building a life around her own interests and goals rather than shared obligations with someone else. I'm focusing on myself for a while, Emily said. Figuring out who I am when I'm not half of a couple. Frank seemed satisfied with this answer. He finished his coffee and prepared to leave. Emily walked him to the door and hugged him goodbye. These visits had become more frequent since Emily moved closer. Weekly dinners, shared errands, the comfortable companionship of family who genuinely enjoyed each other's company. That evening, Emily sat on her balcony and reviewed her financial situation. The divorce settlement had provided enough money for the security deposit and first year's rent on the apartment. Ethan's loan repayments to Frank were current. Emily's increased salary covered her living expenses comfortably. For the first time in her adult life, Emily had money that belonged entirely to her. Savings that weren't earmarked for shared goals or household expenses. Financial independence that felt almost as valuable as emotional independence. Emily opened her laptop and researched MBA programs at local universities. Evening classes designed for working professionals. Concentrations in healthcare administration that aligned with her current job. The possibility of meaningful career advancement that would provide long-term security. The application process seemed manageable. Letters of recommendation from supervisors who respected Emily's work. GMAT preparation that would challenge her intellectually. Personal statements that would force her to articulate her goals and ambitions. Emily felt excitement about the future for the first time in years. Not the shared excitement of planning vacations or house improvements with a spouse, but personal excitement about her own potential and possibilities. As autumn arrived, Emily established new routines that reflected her priorities. Morning runs in the park before work. Evening cooking classes at the community center. Weekend visits with Frank that included movies and walks and conversation that didn't revolve around relationship problems. Emily learned that she enjoyed cooking for herself, creating meals that satisfied her tastes without considering someone else's preferences. She discovered that she was good at managing people at work. Her team respected her fairness and appreciated her clear communication style. Most importantly, Emily learned that she was sufficient company for herself. Evening hours passed peacefully with books and music and projects that engaged her mind. Loneliness occasionally visited, but it didn't overwhelm her sense of contentment. One Saturday afternoon in November, Emily was reading on her balcony when Frank called with unexpected news. I ran into David Miller at the grocery store, Frank said. Ethan's restaurant is closing. Emily felt a mixture of surprise and satisfaction. What happened? Business never really recovered from the pandemic. Plus, there were some reviews online about management problems and staff turnover. David seemed embarrassed when he told me. Emily thought about Ethan's confidence when he'd left their marriage. His certainty that Jessica represented a better life than the stability Emily had provided. Apparently, reality had proven more complicated than his fantasies. Is he still with Jessica? Emily asked. David didn't say, but he mentioned that Ethan moved back in with them temporarily. Financial difficulties. Emily felt no sympathy for Ethan's struggles but no particular joy either. His problems were no longer her concern. Her emotional investment in his success or failure had ended with their marriage. At least he's still making the loan payments to you, Emily said. For now. But if his income disappears, that might change. Emily understood Frank's concern. The loan repayment was scheduled to continue for 8 more years. Ethan's financial instability threatened that income stream. We'll deal with that if it happens, Emily said. Margaret says the court order makes default a serious legal problem for him. Frank seemed reassured by Emily's confidence. The daughter who had once needed protection was now capable of protecting herself and others. That evening, Emily reflected on the news about Ethan's restaurant closure. She felt no satisfaction in his apparent failures, but she felt profound gratitude for her own escape. If their marriage had continued, Emily would now be dealing with business bankruptcy and financial stress. Instead, she was building a stable life based on her own efforts and decisions. Emily thought about the woman she'd been during her marriage. Accommodating and supportive, but somehow smaller than her potential. Always considering Ethan's needs and preferences before her own. Always choosing harmony over honesty when conflicts arose. The woman she was becoming felt stronger and more authentic. Capable of difficult conversations and hard choices. Willing to fight for what she deserved instead of accepting what others were willing to give. Winter arrived with early snow that covered the park outside Emily's apartment. The trees looked stark but beautiful against the white landscape. Emily decorated her space for Christmas with ornaments that reflected her taste rather than marital compromise. Frank joined Emily for Christmas dinner in her small apartment. They cooked together and shared memories of holidays past. The meal felt complete despite being served for only 2 people. Quality of companionship mattered more than quantity. "This has been a good year for you," Frank said over dessert. Emily considered his observation. The hardest year and the best year at the same time. That's often how the most important changes happen. Emily understood what Frank meant. Growth required destruction of old patterns. Strength developed through surviving challenges that seemed insurmountable at the time. "I used to think stability meant holding on to things exactly as they were," Emily said. "Now I think it means building something strong enough to survive whatever changes come." Frank nodded approvingly. "Your mother would be proud of how you've handled this transition." Emily felt emotional connection to the mother she missed. The woman who had modeled independence and resilience. Qualities that Emily had inherited but hadn't fully expressed until crisis forced her to develop them. That night, Emily fell asleep in her own bedroom in her own apartment. The space was quiet and peaceful. No one else's schedule to accommodate. No one else's needs to prioritize above her own. Emily dreamed of possibilities that felt achievable rather than fantastical. Graduate school and career advancement. Travel to places that interested her. Relationships built on mutual respect rather than desperate accommodation. She woke on the last day of the year feeling grateful for everything that had ended and excited about everything that was beginning. The divorce that had seemed catastrophic had actually been liberation disguised as disaster. Emily's marriage was over, but her life was just beginning. She no longer gripped stability. She built it. Life doesn't end just because it breaks once. What falls apart can be the very place where we learn to stand again. Emily had learned to stand not just again, but stronger. The woman who had once defined herself through marriage now understood that the most important relationship was the one she had with herself. The foundation that couldn't be shaken by anyone else's choices or betrayals. If this story gave even a small moment of strength to someone out there, then everything Emily went through means something today. Her pain had purpose if it helped others recognize their own capacity for survival and growth. The truth about marriage and divorce and rebuilding wasn't found in fairy tales or romantic comedies. It was found in the daily choice to prioritize authentic happiness over comfortable misery. In the courage to start over when starting over felt impossible. If this resonated with you, please like and subscribe, and share a piece of your own story in the comments below. Your words might become the seed of the next chapter we create together. Emily's story was one of millions. But it was also uniquely hers. The specific combination of betrayal and recovery that had transformed her from victim to survivor to someone stronger than she'd ever imagined possible. Thank you for spending this time with Emily. With Frank. With the imperfect but resilient family that emerged from crisis more connected than they'd been before disaster struck.